Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Camera Pro Q&A. My name is Gabriel, and today we're going to be talking about Fuji two cameras, X-H2 and the X-H2S, and probably a little bit more about other things as well, lenses and stuff. And to talk about some of those new cameras, we have Warwick Williams, which is a national training manager for Fujifilm. And I just would like to welcome Warwick with us right now.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you here. So yes, we will be talking about mainly those two cameras today, the X-H2 and the H2S, and hopefully we will see some of the key difference between the models and what it means for performance in different areas and who each camera is for. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm getting distracted. I'm getting other messages coming through as well. It seems there are some other people trying to get onto this broadcast as well. But no, it's great, and thank you everyone for joining in. I'm very happy to be invited along to this. So what I'll run through is a little brief overview of the Fujifilm camera range, and then get into the two of our latest X series products. So here we go. This is our digital camera range currently, and what you'll see, it's basically divided into two areas. The green area is what we call our large format cameras, or what most other people I recognize would call medium format. But and they, of course, with the GFX 100 that came out in 2019, is a fabulous camera that, believe it or not, in those days was the smallest 100 megapixel camera around, and was a truly brilliant product, and still is. The GFX 100S came out next, which was a smaller version, but with the same capability entirely of the GFX 100. In fact, in the early days, it exceeded the GFX 100 specs, with the 100 being software upgrade, or firmware upgraded, I should say, shortly after. Of course, the last one of the big cameras was the GFX 50S2. Its lower price certainly attracted a lot of interest, and it's probably been a little bit overshadowed. People would come in and look at the 50S2 and then see the 100S, and the 100S has certainly maintained its popularity. But either way, both cameras are wonderful, and happy to talk about those in a bit more detail later on. You'll notice to the left of our triangle here, we have a couple of square layouts. The top one is representative of the Bayer filter layout. The bottom one is representative of our very unique X-Trans irregular filter layout, which is what we use in all of the cameras in the blue area. The blue area is made up of two generations of cameras now. What we call our Generation 4 cameras, which is the one in the middle there, the XT4, and of course backed up by the XT30 Type 2, the XE4. Geez, why does it say XC4 twice? There we go. There's the first error. That should be XS10. And then the middle one there is XE4, X Pro 3, and X100V, the legendary camera. Now, the two dark cameras at the top of the blue section there is the new Generation 5 cameras. Now, you see it says Gen 5 HS, high speed, and Gen 5 HR, high resolution. And that is a good representation of the X-H2S and the X-H2. So that's those two cameras there. So here we have fallen into the trap again. Does your customer? Well, of course, I'm talking to the customers. So do you want a full frame camera, or do you want what a full frame camera does, or full frame camera results? And this has been the mainstay of the X series cameras for many, many years. We created the X-Trans sensor to compete with full frame cameras. And there's a lot to it. And that's why we're able to say things like this in our photography area, that the X-H2 does actually fill a high resolution photography spot there. Now, of course, you're probably going to want to put proof of all this, but you'll have to sit through a few more specs yet. X-H2S is, as I said, high speed and will shoot up to 40 frames per second with its new HS sensor. And X-H2 is 40.2 megapixels but it has a capability of shooting a 160 megapixel image using its pixel shift technology, which we'll talk a little bit about later as well.
I actually did have a question for the pixel
already.
shift, but if you want to do that in the near future, that's all good. We can keep talking about those.
Well, I was just about to say the way to tell them apart, because they look exactly the same. The way to tell them apart is simply there's an S on the X-H2S as
easy.
where the green arrow is. But if you had that question, I'm happy to field it now.
Yeah, it's actually, the question is in regards to it. It's to explain a little bit more about the pixel shift options, and if this requires a separate app, or if the camera, it all happens in camera.
Geez, how far do you want me to go into this? Can I just put that off, because I'll actually get to a pixel shift image shortly, and I'll tell you
that's all good.
Exactly how it's done. Okay, as I said, photo quality is what it's all about. Can we really compete with a full frame camera? Well, here is an image from the X-H2, and I know it's probably a little bit hard to judge whether that's representative of an A4 image, an A0 image or something, but I can assure you this will print up. Even the JPEGs will print up to an A0 size. But if we crop out a small piece and blow it up, I think that pretty much gives you an idea. Look at that small segment of that JPEG image from the HR sensor in the X-H2, and you can blow it up with that sort of clarity. Now, I've done this in print as well. I'm sure if you talk to the staff at Camera Pro, they'll tell you about my donut pictures. I won't go into any further explanation, but talk to them about it. Now, you mentioned pixel shift before, and X-H2, like the GFX cameras, has the capability to do pixel shift. And it does this by shooting 20 images and basically building a 160 megapixel image in true color. Now, do you really want me to get into exactly how we do this?
I was going to ask you, what do you mean by true color there as well?
True color, this is it. True color means that it's not actually a color interpolated image. Now, if you're not sure what that means, it was discovered many years ago by a gentleman called Dr. Bayer that worked for Kodak, that if you were to create a color image, you actually required 2 green pixels, 1 red and 1 blue pixel for each individual pixel. So that was called color interpolation. And so when you shoot with a digital camera, traditionally it shoots in a color interpolated form. Now, Fujifilm changed that a little bit with our X-Trans sensor, and we use that irregular color filter array. And so we don't use the Bayer filter array. There's still the same basis. We still require red, green, and blue. But the way that we've structured the sensor allows us to, what we believe, and I certainly believe it, to give a truer representation of the color. Now, when we pixel shift the images, we actually don't have to interpolate the image, hence why the sheer number of pictures. Now, if we try and explain firstly pixel shifting the GFX one's probably a little bit easier. It uses 16 images. So if you imagine you've got a GFX camera that's 100 megapixels, and we're going to make a 400 megapixel image. Well, generally speaking, you just require 4 images. That will make up your 400 megapixel image. So why does the camera shoot 16 pictures? Because each of the 4 images ultimately that go to make up the resolution are made up of 4 images that are made up of the actual individual colors, the red, green, and blue. So it actually shoots a 100 megapixel green image, 100 megapixel blue image, 100 megapixel red image, and another 100 megapixel green image, and combines them together. So you're not actually color interpolating, you're getting a true color for each pixel. They do that 4 times, and that ends up being a 400 megapixel image. On the X-H2, which I have a diagram which is further in the presentation. I can probably get to that later and confuse everyone then, but the X-H2 uses the same method but it requires 20 images to do that. And the reason for the 20 images is because of the unusual color filter array that we use on the X-Trans sensors. And that means you can't just do 16 images. To build up the individual colors, we have to shoot 20 images. I know so it may be a little bit hard to imagine. It may be a bit better if I show you there is actually a demonstration of how it's done, but perhaps we can leave that towards the end, because I know that image is right down the end somewhere down there.
No. Okay.
But however, here is the 160 megapixel image that I shot. One thing you have to remember about this is when I say pixel shift, the sensor is moving around half a pixel. Now think about that, and think of how small a pixel is on a 40 megapixel sensor that is the size of an APS-C sensor, and the image stabilizer system is actually shifting the sensor half a pixel at a time to achieve these images. You can imagine the slightest bump, the slightest knock, the slightest vibration could put this off. So it's very well advised, if you are doing this, to have the camera on a solid surface. It shoots the 20 images and will actually save those on the memory card of the camera. You will then copy those off onto your PC or Mac, and using the Pixel Shift Combiner software that you can download for free from the Fujifilm website, it will actually build a DNG file that is readable by your Capture One or your Lightroom or your generally post-processing software. So that's how this image was done. Although rather than do anything to the actual coloring or such like to it, that this is just as it comes out of the camera. So even while I actually created the DNG file and then popped that into Capture One, this is the default colors and setup, if you like.
Yeah.
If we crop a piece out, that tiny piece in the middle there, we get what's actually a 3.3 megapixel crop. And look, I've been around for a while, and 3.3 megapixels I chose because that's the size it's required to do a photo quality A4 picture. So the quality of this is quite extraordinary.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Now there are some other unusual X-H2 features, and I do recognize I'll get back to that diagram that sort of shows the complicated way that the X-Trans sensor handles the pixel shift a bit later on. But the X-H2 does have some unique features, and this is by no means an exhaustive list of them. They're actually a lot more than this. But essentially, the camera has 3.3 million phase detection autofocus sensors across 100% of the sensor surface. And that allows the camera to do some extraordinary subject recognition and subject detection. It takes around about 2% of the frame size for it to recognize a subject. And I'm quite shocked sometimes at the small birds it can recognize. The camera does have a 2 times lossless digital zoom in the 4K mode. So it's actually using the higher resolution modes in the lower resolution filming formats to give you a 2 times digital zoom that doesn't lose any quality. So that means your prime lens becomes a zoom lens, or your zoom lens can actually double its zoom capability.
And that is for 4K 30, 4K
4K,
60?
yeah, for any of the 4K modes and any of the full high def modes.
Because on the H2, you can shoot 4K 60 without crop?
No, in X-H2, that's a price you pay. There is some crop on there.
Okay, but you still can get another 2 times lossless zoom on it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But the other thing is there's actually a 2 times teleconverter, so you can actually put your lenses when on the camera. You can actually enable a 1.4 or 2 times teleconverter. The odd thing about this is, if you think about it, if you take a lens like the 150 to 600, which at 600 is equivalent to 900 millimeters in a full frame, and you put the 2 times teleconverter on it, well, that's essentially 1800 mil. And then you put it on the X-H2 and you enable the 2 times digital teleconverter, that's sort of like 3600 millimeters.
That's crazy.
Look, I confess, don't get too excited. The quality goes down a little bit there, but
yeah, I would imagine.
It's a bit of fun. I would say that the image quality you can get out of that, the 150 to 600, is incredible, but it's also an extremely light lens. I was at Monarto Safari Park on last weekend in South Australia, and some of the people that actually picked up the camera couldn't believe. Some of the people actually said, "Oh, is this a real lens?" They couldn't believe how light it was. 1.6 kilos. A lens of that nature is incredible. But the boffins in Tokyo are very clever. We get to design our own lens elements, and we can do some pretty clever things with those guys over there. So
I was going to ask you, sorry. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the face detection bit as well. How would you rank it in relation to the X-H2S, which is meant to have a much faster autofocus, and even to the X-T4 as well?
Oh, this is an interesting question, and okay, it's a good question. The X-T4. The funny thing is, all of the cameras. First up, let's be honest. All of the cameras have 0.02 sec as their fastest focus speed. So why do we say X-H2S, for instance, is so much faster? It's really the amount of calculations it's doing. So it's actually doing about 4 times the calculations of the X-H2. The X-H2 is clearly not doing as much work as the X-H2S, but it's dealing with a lot more information at once, whereas X-H2S has the advantage of not having to deal with 3.33 million phase detection sensors, but 2.16 million. However, it's running so quick, it's actually running around almost 4 times the speed of X-H2. I sometimes joke and say, well, in actual fact, it could make mistakes on focus about 50% of the time and still be twice as fast as other cameras. And that literally is the case. X-H2, its big bonus, as we'll see in the next slide, actually, is the stacked sensor. And if you want to talk about stacked sensors, I'm happy to talk about that as well. But I'll just finish off with a couple more features on the X-H2, which of course is the 8K movie mode, both internal and external. So I mean by that, it can record to memory cards, or it can record to the external HDMI port, which, by the way, on both cameras is a full-size HDMI connector. So the more upmarket and professional videographers will particularly like that, I think. And the last thing that's quite unique for the moment to the X-H2 is, yes, a slightly higher shutter speed than our other cameras, 180,000th of a second electronic shutter speed. It's probably quite useful if you want to go shooting light bulbs, but in practical sense, it's really for when you're shooting with lenses like the new 56 1.2 or maybe the 50mm f1. You've got big aperture lenses, obviously generally used for portraiture and such like. If you're outside under bright sunlight, you'll want to use the large aperture. Well, that very often means you've got to lower your ISO and you've got to increase your shutter speed. But it's not unusual to find that if you're maintaining a very large aperture, there isn't enough shutter speed and there isn't a low enough ISO. So X-H2 benefits from not only having an ISO 125 in this camera, but also it can actually shoot at shutter speeds up to 180,000th of a second. So it can do some interesting things. So you can actually, if you can get the settings right, you can actually take photos like this light bulb one here, where you can pretty much black out the background. Yeah, I don't know, there could be a party going on behind that light bulb, but with the correct settings, you can actually black all that out and just shoot a picture like that.
So with this photo, did you take it or someone?
I wish I'd taken it. No, it was done in Japan. And I can't resist it. I don't have a gun license, so it's a little bit hard for me to go shooting light bulbs. or I suppose there'd be other ways of breaking it, but that I just found an impressive picture.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty cool.
I could have shown you a portrait shot, and maybe I should have done too, but
but I don't think it encompasses the whole
that gets the idea.
Speed of it. This is a better shot for that. That's definitely
okay. X-H2S. what we were talking about before, the stacked sensor. And the stacked sensor really is the key to this camera's ability. It is faster to focus. It's more reliable to track. It has incredibly low noise. And the image quality is, I'd have to say, if someone says, well, what's the best image quality? Yeah, well, X-H2 just has the edge, or X-H2S just has the edge on X-H2.
Oh, really?
Don't get put off by the 26 megapixels. Yeah, obviously the X-H2, the images will blow up larger, but I think you would be surprised how large you can even blow up an X-H2S JPEG image. So, of course, and it can do this at 40 frames per second as well. That's the other thing. It's quite incredible. But when I first got the camera, I actually also got it with the 150 to 600, hence the picture of the two birds there. That is a JPEG straight out of camera from the X-H2 and the 150 to 600. And the feather detail in there is good enough to satisfy serious bird watchers, I assure you. I've had that checked by a couple. It's capable of shooting blackout free, up to 40 frames per second. And of course, the one of the big advantages with the stacked sensor, even the electronic shutter mode, you rarely find a rolling shutter or distortion in your pictures. So the camera is capable of shooting video. It's 6.2K, 30p is its top one, but it can shoot 4K 120p, 422 10-bit. It has internal and external movie modes, and both it can shoot the Apple ProRes modes internally, and also the obviously externally it can do Apple ProRes and Blackmagic as well, but only up to 6.2K 30p.
I was gonna put you. I will put. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Sorry, go for it.
I was gonna put you on the spot a little bit there with the stack sensor when you said about the noise.
Yes.
Because I shoot Fuji. I have the X-T3, and I work with events, and usually it's very low light, the type of events that I work with.
Yep.
And I actually did use the X-H2S to test it out, see how much better, because I was like, oh yes, that's great. The ISO, I can push the ISO up and I will have like really good noise. But I found that I was using very similar ISO to the X-T3 to get about same noise performance. So I was doing something wrong, or
no, I don't know. I wouldn't say doing something wrong. It varies from scene to scene. I say it is better, and I certainly believe it is better. Some of the images I've done prove that. I'm not going to say, oh, well, wow, there's absolutely no noise. It's an improvement.
Would you know what would be the sweet spot on the maximum of the ISO that it would be pushing on it?
Well, I don't know. It's probably the only camera I will actually use at 12,800.
That's good.
I've used the higher ISOs on the 3 and 4, but I would tend to shoot black and white. But I've been surprised. The color pictures look quite reasonable, even at that level. Look, I am old school. I feel uncomfortable going above 400 ISO. So as a rule, I'll always use the lowest ISO I can. But I have surprised myself in venturing into the 12,800 ISO area, and haven't been disappointed. You'll actually see probably later on. There's actually a double exposure shot that I did at night. It's a genuine JPEG, all exactly as it came out of the camera, and that was shot at 12,800. And
right.
Relatively speaking, there's very little noise on there, and the camera's focusing ability at night is, I find, extraordinary as well.
Yeah, I actually did find that the focusing on like 3 EV or whatever, my -3 is still like fine focus real quick.
Yeah,
it's like that's actually pretty good. I really enjoyed that. In regards to the ISO, still, I was gonna ask you, because usually like those cameras, they have dual native ISO for video.
Yeah.
Does that apply for photos as well, or is different?
Yeah, it does. trying to remember them now. So your native ISO on the S is 160 to 12,800. I think the sweet spot on the video is 1,250.
Okay.
But I'm running out of memory. I'm going to have to refer to documents.
Fair enough. We leave that
somewhere behind this presentation. If you want the specifics, I'll look them up and send them to you. So,
sweet.
Unfortunately, the brain can't remember everything. I've been having to remember quite a lot of figures recently for some reason.
It's all good. Let's move on then. Let's go. Yeah.
So some common features to both the cameras, of course, is face detection with eye preference, subject detection, which is very reliable, bird, animal, motorcycle and bicycle, car, plane, train. As you can see from some of these examples going through, this is the sort of thing it will do. So if you are tracking a guy on a bike, it will detect the bike, it will detect the person, it will detect the head and the face and the eyes if it can, and will track them. And even as it goes behind the pole, it will stay on the bike rider. Now, funnily enough, today I was actually asked, well, what happens if you don't want it to stay tracking the bike rider? You want it to go to the pole? Well, you will go and set up your own custom setting in the AFC custom settings under the AF autofocus manual focus section there, and then it should operate the way you desire, where it will immediately focus on the pole rather than the subject. So like anything, like one of my colleagues, Andrew Hall, often says, you customize the camera for your own use. So don't just pull it out the box, try it for what you do, and then go, oh, well, that didn't work, so it's no good. Actually spend a bit of time. We have a great help desk, 1-800-226-355, that can help you set things up as well. Have Neil on there, who's extremely conversant on all of our cameras, past, present, and hopefully the future ones too. And he can certainly help you with that. And of course, if you're attending any of the events, I'm happy to go through and show these sorts of things as well.
And at Camera Pro as well, we will help you.
And of course, remiss of me to mention, of course, the fact that I even go to Camera Pro is to train these guys so that they can impart my knowledge as well. But the secret they don't realize, don't tell them, I actually learned quite a bit from them as well. So, the other thing, of course, both cameras have a 5.76 million dot EVF, and I know it's not the highest resolution EVF on the market, but I think it's the nicest one. It's not only got a very high refresh rate, 120 frames per second, or up to, but it's the actual lensing that has been put in the camera. So whether you hold the camera close to your eye or further away, or whether you wear glasses or not, it works. You can see clearly. You don't have to jam the eyepiece right up against your eye to see what's going on. Everything works perfectly that way.
Yeah,
and of course, we have over 40 X-mount lenses that suit the camera, ranging from 8mm to 1200mm. Yes, I know people are going to say, hey, you don't have a 1200mm lens. That's the 600mm lens with the 2x converter on it. And so that's that. That didn't work. Okay. To record movies, there are two options here. You can just at any time press the little red button, the movie record button, just next to the shutter release button, and it will record movies at whatever is the preset. So if you happen to be in the middle of a very important photo shoot and a flying saucer goes overhead, you can simply press the instant record button and film it. You don't have to go and change it into the actual movie making mode. But should you be a little bit more serious about your movies, then you can actually select on the mode dial the little camera symbol there, which is your movie mode, and get access to all of, and there are a lot of them, all the different recording features of the cameras.
That's true. There is a lot of options there for you to record different codecs, different speeds, everything. Like you have almost every single option there.
Most definitely. So there's a lot there, and of course, as I mentioned previously, there's a full-size HDMI port there to support that. And of course, you've got your headphone plug and microphone plug. There's a remote release around the other side. There's your USB-C connector there for charging and data and all that sort of thing. So It's a very nice, well laid out product.
We actually,
if you are shooting 8K, sorry.
Yep. I was gonna say for the listeners today, for the viewers, we actually are recording this with an X-H2S, and it's plugged straight into the power, and we don't even need a battery to run it right now. Basically, there is a battery, but it's not being run through the battery.
Make sure you use the right power delivery cable, though. So
yeah.
The USB-C cable has to be a PD rated cable, as does your power supply.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking about this the other day, and I realized that some people didn't realize just how high res 8K was. It's actually 4 times the resolution of 4K. Geez, I thought watching movies on my 4K TV was impressive. 8K is quite extraordinary, and that's also 16 times what full high def used to be. I can't believe we used to watch movies on TVs in 640 by 480, which wasn't even full high def. So the technology's moved on, and these cameras are staying with it. X-H2 also has quite a long battery life. It uses our NPW235, the same battery you'll find in the X-T4. That was introduced in the X-T4, and the same one used in our GFX 100S and 50S2. It on the X-H2 will shoot up to around 680 frames in economy mode. I think it's about 570 in normal mode. I must admit, the camera, I think they're pretty conservative figures. I tend to use the camera in the boost mode, so it's always using the least economical mode. But you can always add a battery grip to it, and that will take an additional 2 batteries, give you around 1760 frames. On top of that, there is an optional cooling fan that will give you 60 minutes of 8K 30p recording at 40 degrees Celsius, mind you, or 160 minutes at 25 degrees without the fan, or 240 minutes with the fan. So the fan is that in the lower picture there with the screen folded out. That fan is that little device with the holes in it and the 2 thumb screws that fasten onto the back of the camera. That is an optional extra. It fits both the X-H2 and X-H2S. And I'd have to say X-H2S, it's probably not such a crucial option to have. X-H2S will shoot 240 minutes at 6K, at 4K 60p, for 240 minutes without the fan at 25 degrees. Obviously, if you're going into a 40 degree temperature zone, it will probably be better with the fan. But I would certainly, if I was buying X-H2 to shoot movies, I would probably get the fan to shoot with it for sure. Just comparing the two side by side at the moment, there's the differences highlighted in red. You'll see some subtle differences there. I think the big one for me is it's 14 stops of dynamic range on the X-H2S as opposed to 13 on the X-H2.
And that's for video or for both?
That's for both. Actually, there are 12 stops in video, both of them.
And it's the 14 stops. What ISOs would you be actually getting 14 stops? Do you know, or not really?
Offhand, no. I'm assuming that's going to be at whatever the best ISO it is.
I mean, yeah, at the lower ISOs.
You've caught me out, my God.
I'm putting you in a tough spot today.
I will always admit to not knowing for sure. I don't want to guess. I don't want to give you a false lead. I'll find out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, make my notes. Okay, the other interesting thing, I suppose, about the X-H2S, of course, you can actually see the flash sync there is 1/250th, but it also has electronic shutter flash sync at 125th of a second. I've also discovered that you can actually shoot electronic shutter flash shots with a high-speed sync flash, so you can almost treat it like a mechanical system. But that's the advantages of a stacked shutter. You will not be able to do that sort of thing. You won't shoot with an electronic shutter on the X-H2. So that's purely one of those things with the high-speed readout made possible by the stacked sensor in the X-H2S. So that's those. That's why we say rethink full frame. I mean, do you really need a full frame camera if you can get all of those features out of a camera that isn't full frame? That's the two new ones. I think the cameras are fantastic. But of course, if full frame is not enough, there is always the GFX. Don't say this is not enough. So we have our GFX range, the GFX 100. It's still a favorite of mine. I must admit, I spent a lot of time with this camera when it first came out. I was fascinated by the fact you could take a camera that really medium format is so very often confined to studios and tripods and things like that. And you could just take it out in the rain, in the weather. I took it to New Caledonia some years ago, and we shot all over the Isle of Pines and Noumea and all sorts of things. We had actual quite a variety of weather as well: hot, cold, rainy, it's just so good. Well, of course, in spite of all of that, we brought out the GFX 100S that did it all in a smaller, lighter package. And yes, I usually have one around. It's hard not to shoot with these when you've actually even tried one. I sort of say resolution's a drug, and these cameras are awesome for this sort of thing. So 102 megapixels, BSI CMOS, what we call our large format sensor, is 1.7 times the size of a full frame camera. If you're talking sheer sensor size, that's the surface area. It'll shoot 5 frames per second continuously. It has an IBIS. It's good for 6 stops of stabilization. Has a focal plane shutter system, but is also capable of using leaf shutter lenses. So if you go and buy those other lenses starting with H that have HC at the end, which funnily enough, if you buy them in Japan, they're called Fujinon HC lenses. Look up your history books on that one as to why. We can actually put those lenses on here and they'll work, and you can actually tell the camera, I want to use the leaf shutter system, which oddly enough also gives you an 800th of a second shutter sync then. So you've got a few more lens options than just the 15 lenses that we're currently offering. But of course, I say that the lenses that we have are wonderful and beautifully sharp, work so well, and like our other cameras, are tuned to the system that they're made for. So that's the 100S. The 50S2 physically looks identical, and the only difference being it's a 51.4 megapixel BSI sensor, so half the resolution. You can still do your pixel shift, although it's 205 megapixels rather than 400. It's a little bit slower in that it uses contrast detection rather than phase detection focus. However, it does benefit from an extra half stop in the IBIS as well. So that's the GFX 50S2. And if you are comparing the two side by side, the differences, and it's generally the first question I get when someone's had a look at the 100S and the 50S2, and they go, okay, so what's the differences aside from the obvious resolution difference? So on the 100S, you get phase detection autofocus as opposed to contrast detection autofocus on the 50S2. You have autofocus tracking, which you don't get on the S2. You get continuous focus. And of course, you get a full 4K movie system with F-Log rather than just full high def QuickTime movie mode on the 50S2. But of course, the S2 is somewhat lower in price. If you are thinking about getting the S2, I urge you not to try the 100S because you don't want the 100S. But having said that, the S2 does have a beautiful picture quality. It's certainly there. I've used it many times, and I know many people doing formal portraiture and such like with this, and landscape. And it's a brilliant camera, and the picture quality it's wonderful. So there we go. That's the two GFX products. Now this is what I was going to say. Now, if you are considering a GFX, the GFX 100S is a rather interesting camera. This is just an example of what you can do with what we call our large format camera, GFX 100, with just one lens. This is all done with the GF 250mm f4 RLMO ASWR. So look closely. And well, someone in the audience might recognize this because I have a sneaking suspicion that the photographer that took this wonderful gentleman by the name of Rob Annesley, who happens to own a GFX and, dare I say, an X-H2S. I shouldn't have let him borrow my camera. He's become addicted to these now. This is one of his shots from the GFX 100S with the 250mm lens. Here's one from Russell Ord, the surf photographer from Western Australia.
Oh yeah, he has some amazing shots, this guy.
Another one of Rob's shots out at Sydney Motorsport Park. Of course, I picked the image with the Corvette, having a bit of a soft spot for Corvettes. From a French ex-photographer. Oh, funny, it's got a Corvette in it, but it's a modeling shot. Yeah, all with the same lens. And then, something else that Rob likes to do with these bug shots. Here's a picture of a dragonfly. Geez, I hope it's really cool, the dragonfly. Done with the same lens. And even this one, I have to show this one. This is the cover of the book, The Underworld by Rob Annesley, the winner of our GFX Challenge last year in Australia. And this is an incredible shot. And again, done with that combination.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So, and if you are looking at lenses, don't forget our latest GF lens, the GF 20-35. I'm getting a huge number of people asking about this. They want to see it, they want to try it. So here it is. The 20-35, a beautiful lens, very wide angle. It's our widest angle lens for the GF range. And surprisingly, it doesn't require some special filter adapter. It will take a standard 82mm filter, whereas often wide angle lenses, you need some sort of adapter to fit larger filters to it. This one works quite happily with its 82mm filter, and it's a beautiful lens, very well appointed. Oh, I did mention that there was this image. This is the image that I was talking about. This is the double exposure done with the X-H2S and the 18-120 f4 lens, believe it or not, at night during vivid. I didn't feel the moon was in the right spot, so I just changed its position. The way I was doing that, if you go into the multi-shot mode or the multiple exposure mode, which will in fact allow you to shoot up to 9 shots, but I only required 2 to move the moon to where I wanted. But I also zoomed up on the moon a bit, took a photo of it, then zoomed out and took a photo of the Opera House in all its glory with the sails lit up by the laser light show of vivid.
I even have it's funny that it goes with that one and you're using the 18-120 there, because one of the questions of some of our customers was in relation to how well does the Fujinon 18-20 120 works with both of them for stills and video in your personal experience.
It works on them far too well. It shouldn't work that well. I must admit, look, many years ago, I rushed out and bought a power zoom lens years ago and thought, oh, this is great. Power zoom, fantastic. And unfortunately, it really didn't live up to my expectations. So I wasn't overly impressed with it. So when I have seen various power zoom lenses over the years, I haven't been all that excited. When I got this one, I sort of, oh dear. Well, I can tell you from the first moment I used it, the power zoom is actually usable, but you can also use it as a, I'm trying to grab my 18-120. You can also use it as a manual zoom lens, manual focus lens. You can actually press the little button on the side of the lens, and actually rather than using the switch there for zoom, you can actually use power focus. And there's even a slow zoom in and out on here as well. So you can actually do a nice track in, track out. The surprising thing is the lens is so good. I hate to say it, but I think it's quite a bit of competition for our 18-135, which has been a very popular lens over the years for travelers. I mean, I've used it myself as an all-in-one lens. It's a great piece of kit. But I think this one, one advantage this has over that is it doesn't have any, it's all the zooms done internally. So there's no external zoom component to it. And I think it may actually be a little bit smaller and lighter, but
Mhm.
and obviously more useful if you do want to shoot video as well. So
Does the 18 to
I
135
think
also, does the
sorry.
18 to 135 also has fixed aperture at f4, or is it
No,
a variable?
that's
Is
the
a
other thing. It
variable,
doesn't
right?
know. 3.5 to 5.6 from memory.
So you've got even a
But
fixed aperture
yeah,
that is also
yeah.
quite.
I even
quite
thought maybe the f4 might be a bit of a handicap, but it's not. It just
Mm.
works so well. And the start of my surprise was actually doing those night shots during Vivid. I didn't start with that lens. I actually started with the 56 1.2, and I thought, well, I've got this thing. I better try it out. And I put it on, didn't take it off. It was great.
In relation to both of the cameras, the X-H2 and the 2S, mostly the H2 because it has a higher, like more megapixels in it. Are there any limitations for the older lenses with the 40 megapixel sensor? And in relation to lenses still, do they perform better? Like what the newer lenses perform better on the cameras, and why do they perform better in the cameras than the older ones? And yeah, that's
The message is fairly simple. There is actually on the Fujifilm website. I think it's actually on both the. It's on our one and the international one as well, the US one. There's actually a table that lists what they call the recommended lenses. These are probably the best performing lenses on the cameras. But to make it fairly simple, obviously the 40 megapixel sensor offers a higher resolution and would require a lens with a higher resolving power. Now, the lenses were made well beyond the capability of the earlier sensors, and so they will work quite happily on here. But if we're talking technical, some of them are better than others. So for a start, all of the red badge lenses are fully compatible with and live up to our standards so far as the 40 megapixel sensor goes, as do all of the later lenses, such as the new 1.4 lenses, the 18, 23, 33, 50 f1, even though I know the 70 to 300, I can't remember all the lists, but the ones that don't work, so if you find that list online and the lenses, your lens isn't on there, don't suddenly go, oh, that's the end of the world. No, it's not. What we're actually, we're pretty fussy about what we class as perfection. And so you would be talking about the edge-to-edge clarity, where the edge-to-edge clarity on some of the lenses perhaps it isn't as good as we would like it to be. But to be perfectly honest, I've been using a whole stack of lenses on the X-H2, and unless you are a real pixel peeper and you're taking photos and blowing the pictures up and looking very closely at the edges, you're not probably going to be disappointed by any of the image quality you get out of it. So I wouldn't say if you've got a whole collection of Fujinon lenses, including some of the older ones, I wouldn't say, well, that's it, throw them all away, or oh no, I can't buy the 40 megapixel camera. They'll work fine. And to be honest, if you're printing the pictures, they'll look great too. In my book, that's what it's all about. I take photos. Yes, it's nice to post them and see them on screens and things, but I think a lot more of the future. And I think a printed picture is going to be a far more reliable keepsake for the future than any digital pictures. But as my kids would tell me, I'm getting on my soapbox speech now. But as I often point out, now if you take a time capsule and you pop your memory card, hard drive, whatever it is, into that, your computer, whatever, and then you put in a packet of prints, what are you going to be able to view in 100 years' time? I know for a fact what you'll be able to do with the prints.
For sure, you're right.
What are you going to do with the other stuff? I mean, do you still play 8-track cassettes or even CDs in your car?
USB or USB-C will even exist.
Yeah.
We have a question here from one
sure.
of our viewers. Let's see here. He was talking about the 50S Mark II and the GFX 100S. what is the difference in dynamic range for the two? And his conclusion is that they are different sensor technology.
But they certainly are. That they are different sensor technology, definitely. Even the micro lens design on the S2 sensor is different. So I'm really not sure the absolute differences on that score. I'd have to research that as well.
For the dynamic range on those two, the difference.
Dynamic range, yeah. I'm trying to remember, and I can't.
Remember. Fair enough.
Sorry. There's too many options now. I'll find out.
I was going to ask you in relation to the X-H2S. It has a very unique ability that I think is first seen in most cameras, which is the option to shoot open gate. And
yes.
If you could explain to us a little bit what is open gate and what are the
open gate is
functionalities?
Basically using the entire sensor. So to record, whereas you'll find, especially with movie modes, we tend to crop the sensor to a 16:9 format. The X-H2S can do it at 6.2K. This is the other unusual. It's recording that at the 3:2 ratio, which is essentially the ratio of the actual sensor, so it can use the whole sensor. Whereas
what kind of
sorry?
Yeah, what kind of usage would you have for that? What
is it's going to come. What really comes down to the actually getting the correct focal length of the lenses. So, I mean, if you start cropping the lenses, then you're, I suppose, in effect, changing your focal length. So, I mean, to the average person, they're probably not going to worry too much about it because they'll just set the camera up where they want to and film. But if you're actually doing a serious movie, you want to know exactly where your focal lengths are if you're going to be changing lenses. It's one of the reasons why our cine lenses are made exactly the same size and this physically the same, and only the focal lengths change, but you can actually pull one out and change it, and everything physically remains the same, and your T-stops remain the same, so exposure is not affected as you change the lenses as well.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's see here. I was going to ask you in relation to the H2 4K footage. It oversamples from the 8K, whereas the 2S oversamples from the 6K.
6K.
And 6K.
Yeah.
And does it has difference in quality from the 4K on the H2 and the H2S?
I think there probably is a little bit of difference there. Look, I'm not an expert on this area. I suspect that you're talking about two cameras with different sensors, different resolutions, different cropping. I suppose there would have to be subtle differences between the two. Any differences, I think, wouldn't be that substantial to be dealt with by an experienced editor in post. But again, if we're talking video, geez, I wish my daughter was here. I spent a lot of money putting her through the Sydney Film School, and she's a very good editor.
So she'll be more on the tech side of it.
She's not.
She films with Fuji, I assume.
Yeah, no, she gets married in a week or so. So, preparing her new house.
Oh, there you go. Someone was asking if the battery charger comes with in the box for the X-H2.
No, unfortunately, we've gone down the track of providing a USB cable and an AC adapter for that. So you charge the camera, charge the battery in the camera. Of course, you can always buy one of these, which is the dual battery charger. This also runs off that same AC adapter and USB-C cable. Oh, and something for the uninitiated. We've had a few people that have bought these And then rather than plugging it into the adapter supplied with the camera, plug it into another USB-C power source via a standard cable, and only charge one battery. And that's why you actually have to have a PD rated power supply and the correct cable to charge both batteries. So just something to be aware of there. Otherwise, it works quite well.
Yep. I have a little case here, like, so I have this guy. I currently shoot with the X-H2 and the X-T20, but really looking, very different.
That's the cameras I'm on at the moment. I'm using my X-H1. X-H1.
And yeah, he's like looking forward to get the new one. So he's looking for a higher resolution. So the X-H2 as the main focus for landscapes, especially panoramas, but also wildlife, including birds, lots of birds. Yeah. So he knows that the X-H2S is a faster camera for that, but wants to know how the H2 compare for wildlife. He rarely shoots sports.
Okay. Well, certainly the X-H1 only has 500,000 phase detection sensors that cover 75% of the surface. It's using our Generation 3 sensor and processor. And while I have a particularly soft spot for that camera, as I attested to before, because of its engineering, certainly technology moves on. And whether using the X-H2 or the X-H2S, it's going to be a lot faster than the X-H1. The X-H2 does benefit from the higher resolving power of the sensor and the more phase detection sensors on it. So you'll find that any losses incurred by the X-H2S, which can process so much quicker, it sort of picks up a lot of that on the sheer size of the sheer amount of data it's able to process to identify the subject matter. So as I said, I was out at the Monarto Safari Park last weekend. Fascinating place. If you haven't been there, really worthwhile having a look into that place. It's an incredible 1,500 hectares, I should say. It's the size of a small European country, and phenomenal subject matter. And X-H2, with the various lenses I had no trouble photographing that sort of thing. I did shoot some birds with it. Oh, that sounds bad, but no, I did photograph some birds with it, and it was fine. But I would say that for high speed, and there were certainly some high speed bird life around there, X-H2S just it was easier, I would say. I mean, I could, with an experienced photographer with a bit of panning capability, shouldn't have any trouble in photographing all but the fastest moving subjects with X-H2. X-H2S just makes it a bit easier, I think, with that. So I don't think you would have any issues with either camera. And certainly if you wanted to go down the path of a more video-oriented product, then I'd probably say, X-H2 is going to be better for you. But in the stills department, I think either camera is going to work. We're
getting close to the end of our stream, so I will.
I did say that I have that explanation for the multi-shot, the pixel shift multi-shot mode. Yeah, there we go. Because I did say that the pixel shifting, the X-Trans sensor, is somewhat more complicated than using the Bayer system. And this is why, if I try and explain this so that you can understand it, now you see that what we're trying to do is build up a collection of all the pixels having a red, all the pixels having a blue, and all the pixels having a green filter placed over them at some stage. And the camera does this by shifting the sensor. So when we actually look, for instance, at shot 2, it says pixel shift and the arrow is pointing to the left. Remember, that's actually the sensor moving to the left, not the the pixel layout there moving. So that's why it seems that we've moved left, but the pixels have gone to the right. That's because we've actually moved the sensor itself. And so the image stabilizer system is actually used to shift the sensor to the left, and to the right, then down, then up. And in doing so, it actually manages to cover all the photo sites with a particular color filter, in this case, the red one. Now, then it does actually the same thing with blue, and then it will do the same thing with green. As we say there, because there are additional green pixels, it really only needs to do 3 shots, but it's easier for us to get it to do the 5. So, and of course, because it requires twice as much green, it does the green twice. So that's how you get your 5 shots, and then it does that 4 times, and that's how you get your 20 shots. And it builds up a smaller pixels, so smaller, finer pixels in the camera's memory, and that's how it produces a 160 million pixel shot. Now I've said that, I'm sure everyone is even more confused, but I must admit, I had to look at this one when I first saw it. I thought, oh yeah, oh what? Believe me, it does make sense when you look at it long enough.
It's like for people who think that photography is only art, that's your science.
Yeah, well, and that is what I consider a huge privilege I have, and that is I am actually able to assist people and at all levels of their photography. And I've particularly, I enjoy helping beginners and seeing the excitement there. And I love working with professionals because I learn so much from them. So,
perfect.
And it is my good fortune to have worked with photographers like Tim Page and Michael Coyne, and people like Megan Lewis, Glenn McKimmon. Gosh, the list just goes on. And of course, the latest one, I'm having a great deal of fun with Rob Annesley, who's was, as I said, was our GFX Challenge winner last year.
Perfect. And to wrap it up, one last question.
Yep.
This one, I will probably, to resume everything, for those 2 cameras, the X-H2 and the X-H2S, which one of them is for which type of photographer? If you had to categorize them a bit, which one would you?
Gee,
a bit hard question there for you.
Well, I've already said, I think if you were shooting video, I would go down the X-H2 path. So there's that. I think that probably the X-H2S is probably going to be more specifically associated with sports and high-speed action. So if you were shooting motorsport, and I mean serious motorsport, and serious sport, if you were shooting, football from the sideline as a pro photographer, I would probably suggest the X-H2S for sure. If otherwise, I mean, if you've got that idea that you're just more general photography, X-H2 is going to work for that. Certainly, I have been, when I first got my one, I was surprised by just how big I could blow the pictures up. There is no doubt in my mind that this thing will compete easily with full frame cameras. I've tried it, put it up against them. I've shot test shots and things like that, and just been absolutely amazed by its capability. And the secret of that is the X-Trans sensor design, and that's where it all comes from, as far as I'm concerned. But I guess if you're into high-speed action, certainly in sort of professional area, that's the thing. Or perhaps if you're bird watching, if you're an enthusiast bird watcher, then I would definitely be going with the X-H2S. And for all other uses, there's the X-H2. Of course, there's all the other cameras that we have as well. I mean, not everyone's going to be into motorsport, bird watching, 8K video, that sort of stuff. And maybe not everyone's bank account stretches to that page. But our lower end cameras, the XE4, the incredible XS10 with its own in-body image stabilization, the XT30 Type 2. I mean, these cameras will work just as well for many people as well. And of course, the ones that I have my own favorites, the X Pro 3 with the old-fashioned design, which I still always have my X Pro 3 around with me. This is my personal camera. I do like that one. I like the old color as well. So and of course the X100V if you can get one.
Oh yeah,
always a good. It's a good party trick to turn up to a party with one of those these days.
One last question then from one of our viewers, Rick Nelson. He has that's I think it's an easy question for you to answer in regards to weather resistance. We have down to -10 degrees, but what is the range on the other direction? When
up to 40 degrees it's official rating. Now I'll tell you a little secret. Don't blast me if you take your camera and do terrible things to it. But when I actually was testing the GFX 50S2 back in 2017 as part of the trials, I actually did a quite an intense trip through the Middle East and up into northern Italy and Switzerland. So that camera experienced all sorts of temperatures, including, unfortunately, at one stage I left it in the car in Dubai, and it was too hot to handle. I was actually holding it out of the window of the car in front of the air conditioning vent, trying to cool it down as we drove out into the desert to take photos of the sunset and photos of a falcon show. Camera worked fine. And it still works fine. And I still have that camera. So these things endear themselves after I've used them. Now, that camera also suffered, aside from that, being taken up to northern Italy, where I climbed a mountain and, they call it a hill, but it's more of a mountain, in a little town called Albano Sant'Alessandro, to take a photo of a church on this hill. That camera got knocked around a bit because the last part of the path is almost a climb, literally. And then the dirt and mud it got encrusted with was very kindly washed off by a rainstorm that I copped on the way back. A few days later, we were up in Switzerland. We were going to shoot some pictures of some lovely stars up in the Alps. And before we even got close to the top, the weather closed in. And it was -12, but the camera was still working. So
tough one.
I have tried our cameras.
Were you still working?
Yeah, and it still is working. Yeah.
I mean, were you still working? Or you?
I must admit, I was more interested in getting back. It was cold. It was very dark, and you couldn't see far. But the camera still worked.
Awesome.
I've used the cameras in various ways. I've had my GFX 100 in ridiculous heat in New Caledonia. It was very hot. I just kept shooting, and it just kept working. So, I mean, there are limits with these things. If you're going to shoot video, if you're going to shoot consecutively, the camera can heat up. I was talking to someone in the Northern Territory the other day saying, my camera's giving an overheating message. They'd been shooting for about an hour. But one thing I noticed that they were shooting with a very slow card. Now, I always tend to use the fastest card I can. So what I've been using the UHS2 cards. It's the ones with the 2 connections on them, which is always the high speed. Oh, that's not focusing very well. The high speed cards with the double connections. I always use those and never had a problem. I did make that recommendation to this person. I said, try change it to a faster card so the camera's not spending so long trying to write away these big RAW and JPEG files you're shooting. And that seemed to resolve the issue. So, I mean, I haven't done any official testing yet. I want to try it out and see what happens if I actually heat the camera up and start shooting with a slow card, but it certainly seemed to fix the problem. Otherwise, hot, cold. Otherwise, I know people have used the GFX 100s down in Antarctica in far colder conditions than they should, and they kept working. So,
perfect.
So I think that we're pretty conservative on those numbers, and I know that I often say to people, you can tip a bucket of water over the cameras, you can't put them in a bucket of water when it comes to rain, and I've used, even from the X-H2 days, I did a trip up the Navua River in the Fijian Highlands, and it just rained the whole time. And I just would not put the camera away. I just kept it out and kept using it. And that camera also I still have, and it still works, and it hasn't been serviced since then either. It still works. I have a lot of faith in these cameras. I consider it part of my duty to push them to breaking point if I can.
Yeah.
And when they don't break, they endear themselves to me, and I want to keep them.
They earn the points.
That's it.
Thank you so much for today, Warwick. We should be closing down our Q&A now. And
I'm sorry about
everyone that
I couldn't answer. I will find out the answers to those. I have to look up my specs now.
It's all good. You are fine. You're just human. You cannot know everything about everything as well. So, but thank you so much for all of the information you gave us. And for people who's watching us, thank you for coming in. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to see more Q&As like that, or on the couch as well. Have a good night. Bye.